Well, I'm denying, and I will be thrilled to see how on God's earth there is a connection between me and Russia.
Let me just finish explaining what I mean by collecting information for an enemy state.
In 2022, a group of Russian-backed operatives broke into my family's apartment in Vienna while my daughter and I were out eating lunch at a cafe around the corner. They were on a mission to steal my laptop, the one that they had seen me using in the Oscar-winning documentary Navalny. The agents were convinced that that laptop held all the secrets to all of my investigations, and they had been sent by Russian intelligence to grab it for them. The break-in was quick. They found the treasured laptop and snuck out as if they had never been there, or so they thought. The true story is that they stole the wrong laptop. The laptop they stole was one I had decommissioned years earlier. The last person who had used it had been my mother, to look up new cooking recipes. After their big heist, I continued with my normal life, still in possession of my actual laptop, oblivious that anything had happened at all. It wasn't until 2 years later, when the Austrian police called me, that I learned about the break-in. That is also when I learned about the Russian-backed spy ring that had followed me around Europe for nearly 2 years, plotting to kidnap or kill me.
Police! Stay where you are! Police! 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 Stay where you are! Police! Stay there! Stay there! Stay there! Stay there! Shut up! Get in there! Get in there! Get in there! Stay there! Stay there!
Hi, I'm Christo Grozev. I'm an investigative journalist. My team and I have exposed state-sponsored assassinations, sophisticated sabotage campaigns, pervasive disinformation networks, and the real identities of Russian spies embedded across the globe. As you can imagine, all of that has made me a target for the Kremlin. I've been aware of the threat to my life for a few years now, as I've continued to publish deeply damning investigations about Russia and Vladimir Putin, a man who does not like to be embarrassed publicly. But in 2023, a lot of this became more real, when 6 Russian-backed agents were arrested in the UK, and I learned of their plots to surveil or harm me. Over the course of the following 2 years, the UK investigated the spy ring, building a sophisticated espionage case against the 6 agents. Throughout, the investigators read me in on certain details about the plot surrounding me, my family, and the risk to my safety and to my colleagues. But much of what I learned about that spy ring came at the completion of the trial in March 2025, at the same time when other journalists found out about it.
On a flight from London to Vienna, they filmed journalist Christo Grozev and planned to kidnap him.
This is the story of the bumbling spy ring, who pursued me and my investigative partner Roman over the course of almost 2 years. Their screw-ups and incompetencies are often hilarious and wild, but their motivations and intentions were deadly serious. From what I understand, the reason I became a target stems directly from our investigation into the poisoning of Russian opposition leader Alexei Navalny. Alongside the Insider, Der Spiegel and CNN, we exposed the FSB agents who had tried to murder Navalny with Novichok in August of 2020. We proved that they had received their directives straight from the Kremlin. The exposé, which we published and made a documentary about, sent shockwaves globally. It netted our team a couple of Emmys and an Oscar. But inside Russia, it caused profound fury and embarrassment, particularly within the FSB, the agency that Putin once himself led. That made me and my colleague from the Insider, Roman Dobrokhotov, Russian state targets of surveillance and a personal enemy of President Putin. In recent years, however, Russian intelligence networks operating in the West have been hollowed out, in big part because of the reporting that Roman and I have done. We have exposed dozens of Russian spies, causing their arrests or forcing them out to be prematurely recalled back to Russia. Many states also expelled Russian operatives who were hiding in the West as diplomatic attachés or other diplomatic staff following Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine.
As the war in Ukraine endures, so does the diplomatic fallout. In the latest round of expulsions on Tuesday, several EU countries kicked out dozens of Russian diplomats suspected of spying.
So in recent years, Russia has been forced to turn to new solutions outside of their normal spy networks, outsourcing intelligence activities to contractors, if you will. And that's exactly what happened in our case, where 6 Bulgarian nationals were tasked with surveilling and possibly kidnapping me and Roman, in addition to carrying out other operations. Enter Jan Marsalek, the former CEO of Wirecard, the disgraced German payment giant. Marsalek wasn't just any white-collar criminal. He had overseen a massive $2 billion fraud campaign before fleeing to Moscow in June 2020. Since then, our team has proven that throughout Marsalek's tenure at Wirecard, he was a Russian spy all along. We'll dive into that story in more detail another time though. What's critical to note here is that when Wirecard collapsed, Marsalek was welcomed to Moscow under the protective umbrella of Russia's security services, the same ones that Roman and I were perpetually investigating. In his new position in Moscow, it now seems that Marsalek volunteered to manage the surveillance operations targeting Roman and me in Europe. On December 14th, 2020, the very day that our Navalny story went live, Marsalek fired off an encrypted message to an old associate of him, a Bulgarian IT consultant named Rusev. Marsalek wrote, "We'd be interested in a Bulgarian guy working for Bellingcat, Christo Grozev. Can we look into this guy?" Rusev replied, "That name indeed sounds very Bulgarian. Excellent. How deep do you want me to start? I have 2 teams in Bulgaria. Each one is 12 people strong. I can tell him 24/7. After this exchange out of a movie, Rusev, operating out of the UK, became Marsalek's operational commander. His assignment was to assemble a network of operatives to track my movements and uncover my sources and secrets. The team he recruited, however, was unconventional, to say the least. The core team consisted of 6 members, including Rusev. The first one was a middle-aged ambulance driver with a code name Mad Max. His real name was Bisser Jambazov. Next was his girlfriend Katrina Ivanova, who worked as an assistant at a medical lab. Then there was the beautician named Vanya Gaberova, who proudly held the Miss Eyelashes competition title and ran a salon called Pretty Woman in London. Vanya's former boyfriend also entered the scene, a home decorator named Tihomir Ivanchev. And finally, there was the hospital worker and one-time professional MMA fighter named Ivan Stoyanov, the most henchman-looking of them all, who was hired as the team's muscle. None had any formal spy training or backgrounds in surveillance. However, they all held one thing in common: Bulgarian passports, which granted the team visa-free travel across Europe. And unlike Russians, they wouldn't stand out like sore thumbs. And they all shared some connection to Rusev, the Bulgarian who had facilitated many of Marsalek's private security initiatives in the past. This was the top-notch crew assembled to hunt me across Europe. Marsalek's network's initial focus, driven by FSB paranoia, was to find out how I had obtained the data for the Navalny investigation. The ensuing surveillance operation against me and Roman was both sophisticated and comically inept at the same time. But then again, the FSB hasn't always been very advanced in their methods either. On the evening of March 6, 2021, for example, FSB officers stopped Roman at Moscow's Sheremetyevo airport after he returned from a business trip where he met me. Under the absurd pretext of questioning him about the COVID-19 situation in Europe, part of an allegedly random survey of travelers arriving from the region, they directed him into a separate room, forcing him to leave his digital belongings behind in another room. As they were questioning Roman on the reputation of the Russian-made Sputnik vaccine in Austria, he suddenly decided to check and see if his belongings were still outside the door. He abruptly got up and opened the door, leaving the interrogator no time to stop him. Both the laptop and his phone were missing. And while the FSB officers feigned surprise and promised the prompt return of his belongings, it took them another 40 minutes to deliver them back. Although they failed in bypassing the PIN codes on his devices, they did manage to install a tracker on his laptop, which he of course then discovered within minutes and threw his laptop away. I had a weirdly similar experience shortly thereafter, not in Moscow obviously, but shockingly in Berlin. I was at the speaking event held at a pompous hotel in the city suburbs. The bellboy, upon my arrival, insisted on taking my suitcase and laptop back, even though I protested that I would be in and out in less than an hour. Eventually I gave in and handed over the suitcase, not the laptop. After the event, I looked up the ownership of the hotel, only to discover that it was owned by a German, quite literally a close friend of Vladimir Putin. I rushed out to get my suitcase, and the bellboy took a whopping 20 minutes to find it. On my way to the airport, I discovered that the hard drive that was in the suitcase had been missing. I contacted the police, who rushed to the hotel, only to be told that the security cameras had been down for maintenance. How convenient. The Bulgarian spy ring, run by Rusev, started surveilling me in Vienna in late July 2021. They rented an Airbnb directly across from my family's apartment building. setting up cameras for a constant stream and feed of the entranceway. Tihomir Ivanchev, the decorator, hit the streets on foot, following me and sending videos of me to the other agents. In one case, trying to catch up with me on foot while I was on a scooter, not an easy task and a comical one at that. Again, I learned all of this when I was presented with the findings of the UK police investigation into the spy ring. It was quite a shock to see video surveillance of my apartment entryway, where my wife and family were living at the time, in addition to so much footage of me during my own travels around Europe. But still, the information these spies were collecting doesn't seem to have been all that useful. They kept losing track of me and making major mistakes. One critical breakthrough for them was when they successfully bribed the corrupt employee at Swissport, a company servicing airports around Europe, gaining access to all of the airline booking data. Suddenly, they were able to see my travel plans in advance, and were able to select the seats directly adjacent to me or to Roman on different flights. They used spy glasses to film me getting on and off planes. On a flight from Budapest to Berlin in November 2021, Katrin Ivanova sat right next to Roman for the duration of the flight, photographing him and recording his screen on his laptop as he texted me, trying to capture his phone's PIN as well. It was later revealed that she had confidently reported the PIN number as a major get to her superiors, but she was off by one digit. In September 2021, I attended a Bellingcat retreat in Valencia, Spain. The ring deployed 3 of the agents, Jambazov, Ivanova and Vanya Gabirova, all converging on the city. They booked rooms in my hotel, on my floor, photographing me eating breakfast with Bellingcat founder Elliot Higgins. Apparently, they tried to get close to me throughout that weekend, but were finding it difficult. Now that I've read all of their texts from that time, I've realized that whenever they failed to succeed at something, they always spun it as having to do with my advanced tradecraft, despite the truth that I was truly completely unaware of their existence. One example of this is when they tried to approach me at the hotel lobby bar in Barcelona. For example, they wrote back to their superiors, "Grozev stops talking and folds his laptop and walks away the moment we approach." They were convinced that I was extremely paranoid and I was aware of being surveilled. Another example of these attempts to get close to me was Gabirova, the beautician from London. She apparently sent me a Facebook friend request, a first step in their plot to honey trap me. Now, for those of you who don't know, a honey trap is a plot to use an attractive woman to lure somebody into their network or to take advantage of them. I did accept her Facebook request since she had cleverly befriended my sister, my cousin, and several colleagues before. To her superiors, this was reported as a major win, the first step in making me fall in love with her. To me, it didn't even register in my memory. Throughout all of these attempts, however, their tradecraft was wildly inconsistent. Sophisticated maneuvers were mixed with amateur blunders, and those blunders were often reported up the food chain as successes laden with lies. When they broke into my apartment in Vienna, for example, the team reported to their superiors that they had cracked a safe that they found there. I've never had a safe in my apartment in Vienna. They were desperate to prove themselves, even though they failed to bring back any valuable intelligence from that break-in. In another incident, they reported breaking into my hotel room by cloning my keycard. He will never know, as any investigation will show that the hotel room was accessed with his own key, they boasted in their report back to Marsalek. In truth, they had entered somebody else's room entirely, encountering a sleeping man, and rather than admitting their mistake, they reported back to Marsalek, "We found a naked man sleeping in his bed." Their biggest coup, at least in their own view, came when they stole a spare phone that I had brought to the conference in Montenegro. They pried it open and found nothing. I used the burner, precisely because it contained no sensitive data. Still, they thought it was a get. By mid-2022, after gathering little valuable intelligence on me, Marsalek grew increasingly exasperated with Rusev and his team. "Our FSB friends are desperate to prove that Grozev is linked to MI6, he complained in one chat message. Then in July 2022, the plot took a darker turn in an apparent escalation of their activities. Marsalek and Rusev had this chilling exchange on Telegram. Marsalek wrote, "Some effing genius suggested again to kidnap Grozev and to take him to Moscow. These people never learn." Rusev retorted, "If you're serious about it, and if Grozev is in Bulgaria, I have the resources to kidnap him, drug him, and lock him up in one secure cave. Then we need to plan the extraction process. That week I was spending time with my family at our summer house on Bulgaria's Black Sea coast. Rusev proudly reported that his team had located my villa and could move in whenever. What he actually found was a property that wasn't mine, wasn't even in the same holiday settlement as mine. When they bribed the cleaning lady to enter my villa, they found only women's clothes and items. Naturally, they once again attributed this to my superb talents of subterfuge. Despite their incompetence, however, the threat to me and my family was real, and increasingly so. By the end of July 2022, they were actively discussing my potential abduction should I return to Bulgaria. When Russia put me on the wanted list in December 22, Marsalek saw it as providing the quote-unquote legal framework needed for kidnapping, adding with chilling detachment. Personally, I find Grozev not to be a very valuable target, but apparently Putin seriously hates him. Now, let me just say, if you're a journalist trying to expose crimes and protect human rights, hearing that Putin really hates you is kind of a badge of honor, probably better than the Emmys and the Oscar. But it's also quite scary. Rusev and Marsalek texted back and forth, debating whether they'd kill me like A, Stepan Bandera in Germany, with cyanide poisoning, or B, like Leon Trotsky in Mexico, stabbed in the head with an ice pick. Marsalek responded that an axe is yesterday's weapon, better to use a sledgehammer, Wagner style. Lovely stuff. Roman, my investigative partner, is even more at risk than I am, as he is a Russian citizen. The group concocted a plan to kidnap him from the UK, where he had sought refuge. Roman Dobrokhotov would be an illegal migrant in reverse, quit Marsalek when discussing how to smuggle my colleague out of the country via a boat. The plan involved fake license plates, routes that avoided surveillance cameras, and speedboats that would need to be sunk afterward. But Marsalek was concerned with the logistics. He said, the problem is how to pick him up in international waters. I don't think the guys here would trust our abilities enough to put us in command of a submarine. At least they were somewhat self-aware, I guess. The perpetrators even discussed assassination as an alternative to kidnapping. Rusev once suggested staging an accident in the shower, but Marsalek dismissed the idea as insufficiently dramatic. Maybe burn him alive in the street, spray him with some super strong acid, VX like the North Koreans, or ricin. An accident in the shower won't deter others. We need more drama. They wanted our deaths to make a statement. Perhaps the most bizarre plot that they considered for killing me was to hire an ISIS suicide bomber to blow himself up next to Grozev in the street. Another fantasy involved kidnapping me by boat to Syria, where someone wearing a latex mask, replica of my face, would fly to Moscow and get arrested on camera. You can imagine how insane it was the first time I heard about all these threats. It's like every ridiculous spy movie rolled into one, fueled by these deranged men. Though they were extremely absurd, these plots weren't just idle threats. There was a serious risk posed to me and my family's lives, and to all my colleagues in my orbit. One of the scariest examples of that is that on the day the spy ring broke into my Vienna apartment, they thought the apartment was empty. But in fact, my son was in his room throughout the entire break-in, playing a video game with his headphones on. It terrifies me to think of what could have happened if he had left the room for a minute, for a glass of water for example, while they were there. One of the risks of Russia's new reliance on these amateur contractors is that they are not trained with the same de-escalation techniques as highly advanced agents, so it actually could have been much worse than using real spies. As you may have been able to predict, the Spies operation was ultimately undone by their own incompetence and chaotic personal lives. On top of being really bad at their jobs, the group had something of an HR disaster on their hands. They were all sleeping with one another. Pisar Jambazov was living with his long-term girlfriend Katrina Ivanova when he began an affair with Vanya Gaberova, the beautician. Meanwhile, Gaberova had previously dated Tihomir Ivanchev, who was very jealous of the new relationships. Jambazov, the cheater, tried to explain his absences to his lovers by falsely claiming that he had brain cancer. When he would leave one lover to see the other, he would tell her that he was going to get treatment. Gaberova became suspicious after he sent her pictures of himself outside a hospital with what appeared to be toilet paper wrapped around his head as bandage. Not the brightest, to say the least. This bizarre love triangle eventually contributed to their downfall, but the real Achilles heel came from the way they communicated. These weren't trained spies. They took selfies during surveillance missions. They posted comments about the quality of hotels that they stayed in while surveilling me. They failed to delete incriminating messages. They used emoji-filled text to discuss potential assassinations. All of this was gold for the prosecution. In January 2023, British authorities moved in.
Police! Police! Stay where you are! Police! Police! Stay where you are! Police! 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 Stay where you are! Police! Stay there! Stay there! Stay there! Stay there!
Law enforcement raided Orlin Rusev's home in Great Yarmouth, the group's makeshift operations base. There they discovered forged IDs, hidden cameras, listening devices, and a massive incriminating messages tying them directly to Jan Marsalek, and by extension to the FSB. He hadn't deleted any of his messages coordinating the missions, with both the spy ring and with Marsalek himself. Among the items they found was also fake Interpol badges, tracking devices with magnets, spy glasses with hidden audio recorders, signal jammers, keycard copiers, fake journalist IDs, state-of-the-art printers for producing high-quality fake documents, and even a Minions toy stuffed with a hidden camera inside. It was a spy's lair, despite Rusev's sheepish insistence that the police had raided the wrong house, caught on body cam footage of the raid.
It's the wrong place.
Support!
I think it's the wrong place.
When police moved in to arrest Vanya Gaderova, they were shocked that they could kill two birds with one stone, so to speak. She was in bed with the naked cheater, Jambazov, another target for their arrest for later in the day. As balaclava-clad officers entered her apartment, she turned to Jambazov and said in Bulgarian, "What have you done?" Katrin Ivanova, Jambazov's actual girlfriend, was at work when she was arrested, and she only learned of his infidelity later. Quickly, UK prosecutors brought rare espionage charges against the spy ring members, accusing them of working on behalf of Russian intelligence, a significant move, as espionage cases are notoriously difficult to prosecute, prove, and rarely reach the court session. Rusev, Jambazov, and Stoyanov all pled guilty. Gaberova, Ivanchev, and Ivanova continued the trial, claiming their innocence at the Old Bailey, claiming that they didn't realize they were working for the Russian state throughout these operations. The jury did not find this compelling, and all three were also found guilty of espionage charges.
Let's start with the ringleader, who received the largest, or longest sentence, I should say, Orlin Rusev, jailed for 10 years and 8 months.
The result is a sentence of 10 years and 2 months imprisonment in your case, 9 years and 8 months imprisonment, 8 years imprisonment, 6 years and 8 months and 3 weeks imprisonment. 5 years and 3 weeks imprisonment.
The trial is really where the bizarre, disturbing reality of this operation was laid bare, as the prosecutor exposed all of the group's movements and communications. It offered a unique glimpse into the evolving tactics of Russian intelligence, a willingness to use unconventional proxies, fugitive criminals like Marsalek, and loosely organized criminal networks of foreign nationals. Amateurs in many ways, yet directed by a ruthless state, equipped with expensive, sophisticated tech, posing a genuine lethal threat. Today, Roman and I continue our work, forced to take even more precautions than before, operating from undisclosed locations, aware that the Kremlin's reach is long, its memory is even longer.
Are you free to go back home yet?
Not really. Every time I go home, I have to be accompanied by a whole sort of platoon of police protection, which is not really going back home.
This specific plot was disrupted, but Jan Marsalek remains free, protected in Moscow. The Kremlin's desire to silence inconvenient truths, to target those who uncover them, hasn't diminished. This story is a stark reminder that threats are real, persistent, unpredictable, and sometimes emerge from the most unbelievable quarters. The work, therefore, must continue. Roman and I were only 2 of their targets. Others included killing a Russian national in exile, staging a fake protest at the Kazakh embassy in London, and throwing gallons and gallons of pig blood on the embassy steps in the process, and surveilling a US army base in Germany to track surface-to-air missiles bound for Ukraine's front lines. You really can't make this up. Subscribe to the Christo Files channel so you can make sure to hear more about this investigation and other investigations we're doing, and more about the crazy plots of the Bulgarian spy ring. Subscribe now so you don't miss it.